Hey y'all, welcome back to the podcast. I am back home. I've been back home for a few days now, and I gotta say, it feels really, really good. I love traveling. I really do. And I love visiting my parents, and it was just so wonderful to have that time with my family. And I was gone for about 3 weeks. And that is a lot for me sometimes, especially when I don't have necessarily the same access to independence like I normally do. And this is one of the things that I find really interesting about being in relationship and being human is how easy it can be to kind of set up our life in a state of flow when it's just us. And then how quickly we can get fucked up when we get taken out of that environment. And I wanted to talk today about that. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but it feels like the thing that's most up and alive. So we're going to roll with it. We're going to keep it real. We're going to keep it raw. We're just going to go into it. Because being human, it's important to know the things that have you be at your best. And I would argue that it's really important to create that into your environment day to day as much as possible. But we have to watch the spot where that becomes a helpful structure, and then it morphs into this territory where it becomes this rigid, controlling cage that doesn't allow us to move more fluidly through our life and adapt and change and have new experiences and move in new directions and go where our heart calls us to go and do the things that our heart calls us to do. And sometimes the things that our soul is calling us to do. And when the soul calls, it usually does come at the cost of giving up some of these creature caves that our human and cages that our human has, put us in. And for the most part, these are comfortable cages. We don't get too fucked up. We know where everything is. Nothing is really getting rattled. But that isn't exactly setting you up to be relationally savvy and to just be out in the world. Because if there's one thing that's consistent about life is that it's constantly changing, it's unpredictable, and humans do this funny thing of trying to impose control onto life, and then that may work for a period of time and then it doesn't, and then that really fucks them up. They take that as a personal hit, or it spins them out, or they can't function. And I'm more interested in you having a system where you are able to be responsive to life. And in order to be responsive to life, we've got to have a bit more of that flexibility and mobility in our life. And what that looks like, especially on an emotional and relational level, is putting ourselves in situations that take us out of our everyday routine and get the data, get the information of where we actually are on the map in terms of how well we can operate outside of our confines of a perfectly curated system. So most of us have a perfectly curated system for the most part for our body, our human. And you'll see just how much bandwidth you have and how much capacity you've actually created when you take yourself out of that environment. So obviously I live by myself and my house is set up exactly how I want it. And I'm responsible for if it's a mess or if it's clean. And I take full ownership over that. There's no one here that I can blame. There's no one here that I can judge. It just is. The state of my house is what it is. And if I want it to be different, then I have to make different choices, do different things. And then when I put myself in an environment where I am co-living with somebody else, so I spent a week and a half with my dad and then a week and a half with my mom. And so I'm living in their spaces. So they have their own respective spaces and how they run it, how they set it up. And so it's a really cool experiment of adaptability. So by now, I know the energetics of both of the homes. I know the preferences of both my parents. And there's this game that we play called adaptability. Like, I don't go into their house and impose my way of living and being in their house. Just like they would never do that when they come to my house. Like, my house, my rules. My house, my flow. And I honor and respect that about their homes as well. And what that does is it forces me to adapt and change and reroute some of the ways in which I kind of operate in my day to day. It totally changed my routines in terms of cooking and movement. And I do like putting myself in these environments every once in a while so that I don't get too rigid in the way that I do things, in the way that I operate. And when I'm put in an environment where I'm like, okay, my only option for movement is to go to the gym behind my dad's house or up the street from my mom's house, or I can do, a movement session or a workout session in the basement. Those are my options. And I can sit there and protest that and be like, oh, this isn't my preference. Or I can move with the reality of what life is in that moment. And it really comes down to getting into alignment with the deeper values. So when we're living in alignment with our deeper values, the circumstances in our environment can change and we can still anchor in that cohesiveness, that sense of stability. And I really think that when people feel chaotic, when they go into other environments, it's because this internal anchor isn't anchored. And the things that they value aren't necessarily completely embodied in their day-to-day actions. So when our values are really anchored, and to me, eating well and moving are values that are very important to me. If I don't tend to those, I'm not at my best. And I'm also not the funnest to be around. And my body starts to get achy and I start to get more agitated and I'm short fused. And I mean, I'm a pretty patient person to begin with. So if little Miss Patience and understanding over here is feeling agitated, I know it's because I haven't been tending to that core value. I'm not actually living in alignment with it. It's kind of gone astray. I've gone astray. And so the cleanup there is to come back into alignment with what I say I value. And this kind of goes, we can go on many offshoots here, but it's really important, especially at the start of a new year. And whether you are a big like January 1st, I kind of redesign my whole life and like take inventory and reset it, or maybe you do that in the spring. It doesn't matter. But whenever you do that inventory, it's really important to look at what are the core values that are going to define this next season of my life? And am I congruent with those values? Am I living in alignment with them? Am I embodying those values? I was listening to a podcast this morning and she was talking about this to a degree. And something that she said pinged me and got me thinking of, a lot of people will say something like honesty is a core value. And I know I've said that. It is one of my core values. And then we have to look at the actual embodiment of that. So if honesty is a core value of mine, how much of my life am I actually being honest? Because if I'm running a people-pleasing pattern, the people-pleasing pattern is in complete opposition to that core value. So I'm actually not in alignment with that value. And if I'm not in alignment with that value, there's a high probability that I'm going to project that value onto other people and expect them to embody what I can't in order to feel safe. It's this big mindfuck that I've been mulling around all morning. But I can see how that's played out in my life, where I say my core value is honesty. And what I'm actually saying is I want you to be honest, because when you're honest, I feel safe. But I don't hold myself to that same standard of honesty. I'm only going to conditionally tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth when it feels right to me to do so, not necessarily when it feels true. And that is a slippery, slippery slope. And here in my world, we like to clean these areas up. Like I'm pretty intentional when it comes to how I'm operating. And if there is something that's out of whack, out of alignment, I will look at it and I will clean it up. And I will reactivate my integrity around it. And when we are in this path of personal development, spiritual development, relational development, there can be this idea that we have to be perfect in our quest. And if we don't get it right, we've somehow fucked up. That's really, it couldn't be more of a miss the point. We miss the mark with that level of thinking. Because the point of doing this work is to actually be able to realize when you're off target and bring yourself back. And the distance between, you getting off track and you becoming aware of that and getting back into alignment, all of those junctures get smaller and smaller. So it's not actually about getting to this magical point where you never get triggered or you never have a breakdown or you are never fucked up about something. That is not going to happen. That's actually a fantasy pattern. Utopia thinking is fantasy pattern thinking, and it takes you out of reality. And if you're out of reality, you're out of your body. And if you're out of your body and out of reality, you cannot connect to the energetics of creation, which means you're most likely going to run on default and your life will kind of get away from you. Versus if we are conscious creators of our life and we are doing life by design, we don't hold ourselves to this impossible standard of perfectionism or this fantasy of perfectionism. And the fantasy of perfectionism has a lot to do with, I don't want to feel discomfort. I actually don't have the internal infrastructure to digest disappointment. A lot of people do not have the internal infrastructure to digest disappointment. That is why they're constantly trying to avoid it. And we can look at these people-pleasing patterns. We can look at pretty much any pattern that you're running. And a lot of them will be able to root them in this spot that does not want to feel discomfort, that does not want to feel disappointment. Because when discomfort or disappointment get activated, so does shame. And if you haven't listened to my episode on shame, go listen to it. It's so dope. It's so good. And if you really want to alchemize that, come and apply for Initiated, because that is the container where we work on the foundations for relational mastery. And alchemizing shame is a huge part of unwinding from these codependent hooks and templates that we've been coded with, and to be able to reprogram your blueprint and to build in new habits and new skills for relating that allow you to operate at a more expansive level. It's a vibe. So I'm enrolling the entire month of January for this program. I first taught it in 2021, and I've had a solid crew of women in that container for the last 5 years. And it's time to re-enroll, to open the doors again, to reteach some of the material, because there's obviously ways we can deepen the teachings and the practices. So we're going to be doing that starting February 1st. And anyone who enrolls in January also gets to come in and get access to all the calls and the curriculum that's currently in there. And the reason why I feel so passionate about this is because when we want to create our relationships on purpose, when we want to create our life on purpose, we cannot have these patterns running in the background unattended and expect those results, because those patterns have a very strong investment in keeping you locked in a very familiar identity, but also the infrastructure for your life. So if we go back to the start here, where we're talking about how you kind of set your environment, and sometimes if we get too rigid in that, it becomes a cage. Well, our patterns also become cages. And this is why it's so important to get out of your usual flow of things, out of your routine sometimes, shake shit up, do things a little different, put yourself in new environments to see how responsive you are in those environments, and see how responsible you will be to living congruently with your values. So if you are doing inventory on yourself and your life, and you're wanting to design it intentionally, I would look at, what are my core values in this season of life? And maybe you can go back on this last year even. In 2025, what would I say my main core values were? And what were the ways that I acted congruently with those values? And I mean, that's great information to know. It'll really help your self-esteem. And this is the question that most people will avoid because they don't like the answer. And it's in the avoidance of the answer that the pattern keeps running. So if you are one of the brave ones, which you probably are if you're this far in, and if you're in this episode, you are probably a much deeper diver than maybe you even give yourself credit for. But I would also explore, in what ways in 2025 was I incongruent with this value? And what specifically was I doing, saying, and ways of being that had me be incongruent with this value? And then once you get that data, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to look at, well, what's the payoff here? There's always a secondary gain. Always, always, always. And the secondary gain or the payoff is something that you get out of not cleaning that up. Something that you get, or something that you get to avoid. And until you know what that is, the pattern is going to keep running. Not much is going to change. And I don't say that as, a want. I say it more as, this is just the map. I've been walking this journey for a very long time. I've been a coach for over 15 years. I've been mapping how people's patterns work, how relational patterns work, and what it really takes to live a life that you're lit up by, a life that supports you, and relationships that bring you fully to life. I think I mentioned this on maybe last week's podcast, or maybe I said it on Instagram or TikTok, who knows? It's been a bit of a whirlwind, but my whole philosophy with relationships is that I'm not looking for happily ever after. Happily ever after is fantasy. And as I mentioned earlier in today's episode, fantasy keeps you out of reality and keeps you out of that creative pocket. It's not for me. I mean, a little fantasy every now and again is not going to hurt anyone, okay? But if you're primarily living in your head, if you're primarily living in fantasy and you're not actually relating in real time, it's not going to translate to anything, right? And when we want to create a life that feels really good to be in, we have to take a look at our tendency to pop off into fantasy and all of the ways that we do it and all of the ways that we give ourselves an out for, not having to be congruent with ourselves and our life and our values. And so when I look relationally and I see this ideal of like happy ever after, that's not what excites me, because I know that that's not real. I know that on this planet in Earth School, you are not going to be happy 24/7, even with your most aligned partner, even in your most expansive life. Shit is still going to hit the fan. You are still going to have conflict. You are still going to have moments that are bumpy. You are still going to have challenges that you're going to have to work through. That is Earth School. And when we can't even be with that reality, we can't actually set ourselves up to create. So my philosophy with relationships is, instead of happily ever after, it's more alive ever after. I want the relationship that brings me most to life. And being alive, that really requires me to be in touch with my full range. And that means a relationship that, yes, it's going to have a lot of flow to it. It's going to have a lot of rapport and connection and alignment to it. And we're still two humans trying to fit together, our conditioning, our lives, our dreams, our desires, our ways of thinking, our ways of being. And sometimes it's going to be really smooth and sometimes it's going to be a bit clunky. But the person who ultimately is the end game is the person that you can design a live ever after with. And we get to that point by cleaning up these threads in our own life. We set the foundation. We create the conditions in our day-to-day when nobody is watching. This is how I know how ready someone is for partnership. Who are they when no one's watching, and what are they doing when no one's watching? Because the people who aren't ready for partnership think that they can just do fucking whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, no one's seeing that I'm doing this thing that's totally incongruent with how I forward present to the world. So it's the shadow behavior. It's the shadow compulsion. And they keep it hidden. And those patterns of hiding and deception are completely incongruent with up-leveled partnership, with alive ever after. Like, that is a first class ticket to hell. It really is. Because the relationship then becomes about protecting and hiding and keeping that shadow material hidden, because it actually hasn't been integrated. It hasn't been worked through, and we haven't faced what we need to face in ourselves to look at, why am I doing that in the first place? What's the secondary gain? Like, what do I get from being out of sync with myself? Even though I'm the only one who knows. We think that if we're the only one who knows, it doesn't matter. But that matters the most, because how you view yourself is going to inform how you relate and what you will allow yourself to receive. So if you are on the back end of your life and you're acting incongruently with your values, and you're doing some of these shadowy behaviors when no one's watching, let's say, for argument's sake, you fandangle someone into a connection with you, there's going to be an inevitable moment where you fuck it, where you sabotage it, because your internal identity does not match the person that you've presented. It doesn't match maybe who they know you to be either. And maybe they're getting to know like the you that is mostly congruent, but then there's this piece that isn't. And that piece is like, fuck you. Like, I can't believe you exiled me. And you want to exile me? Fine, I'll show you. And that part gets in the driver's seat of your life, and it drives your relationship off a fucking cliff. And it's so tragic. And it's also very, very human. Okay, I have done this. The reason why I can speak to it is because I have done it. I have been that person who has sabotaged relationships again and again and again when they get to this point where, you know, the internal dialogue is, if you really knew who I was, you wouldn't love me. You wouldn't choose me. And the reason that dialogue is there is because there was always one or two spots where I was majorly out of integrity, where there was incongruence with my values that I hadn't addressed, that I hadn't cleaned up yet. And the good news is cleaning that shit up is actually pretty easy to do. You know, it does require some shadow work. It does require, and oftentimes you'll have to do this in some sort of therapeutic container so that you can be received and accepted as you make these shifts and transformation. But it's not that hard to clean it up. Like, if I look back on my life, the major cleanup that happened, it took about 6 months in total. And that was just like 6 months of pure devotion to cleaning up my integrity, to getting in alignment with my values. That was my devotion. I didn't set out for that to be my 6-month goal, but that's just how it ended up happening. And then all of a sudden, my life started moving in a new trajectory. All of a sudden, I'm literally moving cities. All of a sudden, I have a social circle of soul friends that I've always dreamt of having. All of a sudden, I'm falling in love and ending up in a relationship with someone who would change the course of my life and how I love and how I relate. And all of that happened because I made this decision, this choice to clean it up, to get congruent, to get in alignment, because it mattered to me. I wanted to know that I was someone that I could be counted on for. I wanted to know myself as someone who says what she means and means what she says. I wanted to know myself to be someone who follows through and who will act consistent and congruent in all areas of my life, not just the ones where people are watching externally. And I like to think of it like this. One of my coaches gave me this frame a long time ago. And she's like, imagine you have your spirit team and they are watching everything you're doing in the day. And the whole game, the whole goal is, by the end of the day, they are giving you a standing ovation for everything that you did that no one saw, but they saw and you saw, that made a difference to your integrity, that had you be in alignment with what you say matters to you. And it's those spots that you're like, oh, this doesn't really matter. You know, oh, if I just, dabble over here and, I'm just going to like put on that porn, or I'm just going to like message this person that I know that I fucking shouldn't, or I'm going to go and eat that bag of chips, or, have, 5 shots of whiskey, whatever it is. We all have our vices. We all have the thing. But it's important that you're able to identify what that thing is that you give yourself an out with because no one's watching. And that's the spot that if you tended to one thing this year and you cleaned that up, I promise you it will change the trajectory of your life forever. It is one of the most powerful moves you could make, is to clean that up, so that you set yourself up to really be able to hold your success without sabotaging it, and hold love and intimacy and relationships without sabotaging them. Because it's not just romantic relationships that we can sabotage. We can sabotage creative partnerships. We can sabotage friendships. We can sabotage work connections. We can sabotage relationships with our family members. It's not just romantic relationships that will show up in. It'll show up in every way that we relate. And so by getting right into the heart of it and doing a little bit of shadow work and a little bit of exploration, you really set yourself up not only to hold the magnificence of the life that you're here to generate, but also when those aligned relationships come in, whether they're romantic or platonic, your internal self-image matches the level of connection that's happening. So when it happens, your system's not freaking out and being like, I'm not worthy of this, or running that story of like, if they only knew who I was behind the scenes, they would leave me. So I'm going to sabotage this and I'm going to blow it up first, or I'm going to leave first so that they can't figure that out and I don't have to face that shame, because that shame is so intense. And if they rejected me the way that I reject me, I don't know that I could handle that. That's really what's going on. And as you can see, that's a lot of energy that's going in to maintain this facade, this pattern, this way of being that is not really in your best and highest expansion to run indefinitely. And so we want to get into the heart of the matter. And when we look at this distinction of what are my core values and what were they in 2025, and how was I in alignment with that and how was I not? And if you say that there's no spot where I wasn't in alignment, I'm going to call bullshit. And you might not be ready to do like the deeper threads of the work, but there's always a spot where we're not in alignment, always. And if you can tell the truth on yourself about that, you're ready to go deeper. You're ready to step into that spot of consciously creating and designing your life and your relationships. And if you're not there yet, you're not there yet. And the best thing to do is just honor where you're at and then give it a try tomorrow. And keep repeating until you get to the day where you can be really radically honest with yourself and say, yeah, this is how I was in alignment, and these are the spots that I wasn't. And I don't have to make it mean anything about myself. That's the key. That's where people get really fucked up, is they see the integrity outage and they make it mean that they're a loser, that they're unlovable, that they're bad. Again, like, we have to give our mental faculties something a little more expansive to chew on. So if you're going to make meaning about that, make meaning that empowers you. So if I did this, if I acted out of alignment, I acted incongruently, it means that I have a pattern running that is old and familiar. And I'm grateful that I can see that pattern, because in seeing the pattern, I can now transform it. It's a much more neutral frame. It's not like this positivity bypassing thing. Like, that's not my jam. I'm not into that. But I am really into reframes that allow you to be more connected to reality and that give you a bit more opening into the space of possibility. So when you work with it like that, if you have to assign a meaning to it, assign a meaning that empowers you, that is at the very least neutral, or you can use the frame that I just gave you. It's a very powerful one. It works like a charm. And when we do that exercise and we see, okay, this is where my integrity needs some cleaning up, then we're able to really hit the ground running for whatever it is that we want to create. And then if we want to see like how mobile and how flexible and how much we're actually in that creative vortex we are, it's a really good exercise to take yourself out of your regular environment, put yourself in an environment that's unfamiliar so that you can see how responsive and adaptable you are. Because the more you clean up this integrity, the more you clean up the incongruence with your values, the more adaptability and mobility you'll have out in life. The more you're going to be able to work with circumstances that aren't necessarily ideal, but you can work with them for a period of time, like when you go traveling. Like for me, the 3 weeks, I knew that I had set the perfect amount of time to be away, because by the end of that time, I was starting to bump up against that spot of feeling a little agitated. You know, I'm like, okay, I need more alone time. I need my independence. I need my routines. And I did a really good job at calculating how much time I could be in that environment and be my best self. And it's such a huge quantum leap because, 15, 20 years ago, I was getting a couple days and then I was hitting that edge. And now it's up to 3 weeks. And I get even longer legs of that if it's a different season of the year where I do have a little bit more autonomy. I can kind of play with my independence in new and flexible ways in new environments. But in the winter season, when it's -40, there's not a lot of options. And so it's a really good time for me to see where I'm actually at on the map. And I was just really proud of myself for how much capacity I've created and how adaptable I am and how in integrity I am with those values, that I was able to maintain moving my body and cooking in ways that actually make me feel good. So I left the holidays not feeling like a bag of dicks. I left the holidays feeling revitalized, really nourished and really strong and open, well rested. It was a very different experience to have that long of a pocket in that season of winter and still be able to maintain all of the things that have me be at my best, but do it in a way where I'm having to be flexible and adaptable and change my routines. And so I really want to invite you to play with that exercise as well of, have your routines, have the things that set you up for success, and then intentionally put yourself in situations where you don't have that and see how much time and space you get before you start to get fucked up. That's really important information. And once you take that data, then we can really work on a deeper layer of, okay, now how do we expand that capacity? What actually needs to get cleaned up in the back end that will allow for you to have more mobility, more availability, more response ability in your life as a whole, and being in environments that are not your perfectly curated environment. Okay? So I'm going to leave that there. If you would like to come join me in Initiated and you're like, I'm ready for the path and the foundations of relational mastery, it is a minimum year-long journey. There are 13 modules that we go through, and it's really a practice container. You're there to practice the foundations of relational mastery. So you got to learn them and then we practice them. And if you would like to come join me in the last year experiment, I kind of did a little fandangling, little changing to the infrastructure of it, where I'm just going to give you the 12-month experiment. There is a community space for y'all to jam with each other, but we're not going to do any live calls. We're just going to have the journey. You get to do with it as you want. There's a space where you can connect with the other people who have said yes, and it's $88 to join, and you get the community space for a year, and also my relational review class that I did that was 10 out of fucking 10. You get that replay for a year as well, and I'll probably throw in some extra teachings throughout the year. And who knows, maybe like 1 or 2 calls, let's be honest. But if you'd like to join, it's $88 until we start on January 15th. And once we start on January 15th, the price goes up. And it goes up every single month until the end of the year. So you can join anytime, but the price will be different. And so if you'd like to come play, those are your options at this point in time. And if you got something out of this episode, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you're taking away, what you're learning, how it's impacting you. And if you can share it with someone who you know will really benefit from this conversation, please do that. And if you haven't already liked and rated and subscribed to the podcast, I would be so grateful if you did. That really helps it rank and get into the feeds of people who also want to keep it real and raw. Okay, I love you, friends, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye.